Hi, this is Hezi bin Sur, founder of ianglo-auto-association. In today's video, we're going to discuss car leasing in Israel and how you may find it a very useful tool for ownership of personal transportation. Leasing, in a nutshell, is an advanced form of financing, which allows you to pay only for the portion of the car's usage while that vehicle is in your possession. Veterans of leasing express continually that they will never go back to the old purchasing and selling scenarios, and that they're grateful that Israel now has leasing plans that are very similar to those used in the West. You will find some detractors, but this is generally from persons who either don't understand the concept fully or have entered into leasing plans that do not conform to traditional Western standards. We hope to give you the information you need to make an informed decision on if leasing is an appropriate option for you and your family. But first, a bit of history. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. I moved here with my wife and 5 children in 2002. Our original home was in Shiloh, home of the first permanent Michigan during the time of Yoshua ben Nun, a very special place, I might add. We then moved to the Jordan Valley, which is our current home, and where we have set up offices. We encourage anyone watching this video to give the Jordan Valley a consideration when contemplating where to raise their families. It's nice and warm here, but as everyone always adds, yeah, but it's a dry heat. Thank heaven for AC. I've been involved in automobile leasing since the late 80s. The company that I owned there was one of the first to introduce automobile leasing to credit unions in the U.S. So I hope that I can shed some light on the issue of leasing for you. So let's get started. The importance of personal transportation in Israel. If your employment is going to require that you commute, more than likely you'll find that personal transportation is a necessity. Now, it is true that we have an adequate public transportation system here, but it can be frustrating because of the time schedules. Some persons feel as if they're holding down a job and a half. They have their regular workday, and then they face hours of public transportation, and it can be very tiring. Then there is personal freedom, which is self-explanatory, yet can be key to enjoying different activities, which brings us to the third point, the acclimation process. Now this is listed as number 3, but not because of its unimportance. I'll tell you a personal experience. When we made Aliyah, we went without a car for the first year and a half, which was a huge adjustment for us. There were a couple of reasons for this decision, but mostly my being familiar to the car retail industry and knowing how poor of an investment that an automobile is, I was not in a hurry to use the money that we had saved to make Aliyah and to put it into such a depreciating asset. And there were no suitable leasing options at that time. However, looking back, I see the damage that it caused the family psyche. There are numerous areas of life adjustments you will make when moving here, but I can tell you from experience, if I had it to do over again, I would acquire personal transportation much more quickly than I did to make the transition a little easier. I see the trick to adapting to life here is two-pronged. First, of course, you have to become accustomed with the local way of doing things. But it's important to also surround yourself with things that give you a level of comfort. And for us, and possibly you as well, an automobile provides that comfort and that familiarity. You have 3 main options here for car ownership. You can purchase newer used cars using cash or financing. You can opt to import a car from the West, but this is a cash-only proposition. And you have the leasing of new and used cars, which is what we will be discussing. We will discover what to expect, what not to expect when leasing. Then we will cover the benefits and analyze why we feel leasing is more of a benefit here than even it is in the West. The first thing I would like to challenge you to do is to begin to shift the way you look at or categorize a car. It's important to move car ownership from the asset or investment category to that of an expenditure, a monthly cost. Let's use the example of a home. A car is not like your home. Your home is truly an asset. It will either hold or hopefully appreciate its value over time. When you are contemplating the purchase of a home or possibly selling your home, the negotiation never shifts to asking how many months the home has been standing, so that a calculation can be made regarding its value. There are other factors that determine a home's value: the location, the condition, its size, but not the months or years it's been in use. In contrast, when determining the value of a car, its worth is diminished by every month that it has been registered for service. This is definitely not characteristic with the value consideration of assets. So this is why we suggest that consumers consider a car to be more similar to the utilities in your home than it is the home itself. Its value and its cost are directly related to its use. With electricity, you have two categories of usage. There is non-discretionary, which is the cost of electricity for operating necessities such as your refrigeration and freezer units, minimal lighting for security and for being able to move around your home without breaking your toes on the furniture. Then there's a discretionary usage. This would be lights that you use for ambiance, for entertainment activities, and for air conditioning and heating. The car too has discretionary and non-discretionary costs associated with it. The non-discretionary would be what we just discussed, the passage of time. It's a constant cost. If you buy a car and park it in your driveway or garage and cover it up, it's still going to lose value even though you're not using it. The discretionary category comes in its use. The cumulative kilometers, the type of activities and terrain you covered during those kilometers, wear and tear on numerous systems, and planned obsolescence. We have a couple pages devoted to discussing planned obsolescence on our website, but suffice it to say, the manufacturers of all automobiles design their products in such a way to make them artificially depreciate to stimulate new sales. So for all these foregoing reasons, we believe it's prudent to shift the categorization of car ownership from an asset and look at it for what it really is. It's a cost. It's an expenditure. And as an expenditure, it would be wise to investigate ways to minimize this cost. Who is not a candidate for leasing? A person who is looking to spend 40,000 shekels or less on a vehicle would not be a good candidate for leasing, nor would a person who historically has kept their automobiles for 6 to 7 years or more. If this is your situation, you probably won't find the rest of this discussion applicable to you. But if it's not your circumstance, we urge you to keep viewing the video. So who is a candidate for leasing? If you need to conserve cash, if you desire full coverage warranties that only new cars can offer, if you've ever financed a car in the past and did not complete making all the payments, you would be a candidate. You in effect leased anyway without the benefit of lower monthly payments. If you need to protect your obligo. For those of you not familiar with the term obligo, this is the maximum amount a bank can loan any one customer. So if you want to ensure that you have the ability to borrow money for other circumstances in life, then leasing is a great option, because it's not counted in your overall indebtedness at your bank. Then of course others who are candidates for leasing are those who prefer new cars over used. Why we like leasing in general. First, there's the absence of the buying and selling processes. And out of these two processes, buying is actually the easier of the two. Selling can become quite a task. And as we already mentioned, there's the depreciation protection, continuous new car warranties, lower monthly and down payments, gap insurance, which only applies to cars that are 2 years old or less, and the conformity to modern ownership habits. But before discussing these points individually, let's look at the differences in leasing plans in Israel as compared to those in the West, and then we will discuss the similarities between the two. There are two main differences you will find when leasing here. Number one, the payments are higher for leasing and for financing on the exact same cars, and there's always a down payment required. So we want to introduce you to our little friend here. His name is Buddy. That was the name of the last calf that was born on my farm back in the States before we made Aliyah. Buddy represents the way that most new immigrants feel when they first seriously encounter the automobile market in Israel. We have an expression in Texas. It's like a calf looking at a new gate, which little Buddy is doing here. He's trying his best to figure out what he's looking at, just as Olim have difficulty wrapping their heads around car cost here. The reason our cars are more expensive, and subsequently so the lease and finance payments more expensive, is the heavy taxation and import cost of all the cars on the road. When a person reflects on the cost of cars, for example, in the U.S., maybe in the $17,000 to $20,000 range, here, even if they're able to utilize their Olim rights, they are still looking at the identical car at double the cost. Then, when it's factored in that the earning potential here is not at the same levels as it was in the West, it can leave a person asking how Israelis can afford cars. Possibly in your previous home, you could also lease with no money down. Here, there's always money down required on real lease contracts. The purpose for the down payment is twofold. One we will discuss a little later. It has to do with gap insurance. But the other reason is a lease company wants to be sure that the person they are going to allow to use their property for the next 30 months has a monetary tie to the car beyond the monthly payment. What similarities do our leasing plans have to the West? Payments are generally cheaper than conventional financing. Real lease plans are closed in, and this is a very important point which cannot be overemphasized. Closed in means you have no obligation to the car at the contract's end. If you enter into the car market on your own, do not be fooled by an overzealous salesperson who tries to tell you not to worry about the future value, that your car will be worth so much more that it will not be an issue. This is an opinion, not a contractual closed-in contract. A real lease plan will also have kilometer restrictions. Generally, it is in the 20,000 kilometer range per year, which is a generous amount for most people. Since the lease company will be ultimately responsible for the car's value should you choose to trade it in or abandon, they need to know what its future value will be. Accumulated kilometers directly affect that value, so it must be restricted to ensure the future value. If you go over that limit, clearly stated in the contract, you will be charged for the extra kilometers. But this is not as ominous as it sounds, because even a person who purchases a car with cash has to be concerned with the kilometers, because the catalog used by every buyer and seller in Israel allows 20,000 kilometers per year as normal usage. Anything beyond that will diminish its value at the time of sale. You will have 4 main options at the end, and you have the first right to those options. But should you choose to do nothing, you can. That's the trademark of closed-in leasing. Your options include to trade the car in on another lease or purchase, abandonment, buy, or you can sell the car. Differences in leasing plans inside Israel. This is not a blanket endorsement to all leasing plans offered here in the land of Israel. There are internal differences in plans here as one might expect. Let's begin with what we call the pseudo-leasing plans. This plan, more than any other variety of leasing plan, has caused untold damage to the concept of leasing because it's overutilized and oversold. To begin with, it's mislabeled. It's not a lease at all. It's an alternative way of financing that looks like a lease. By the way, this is the only type of lease programs dealers can offer in addition to conventional financing. Call it what you will, but when you make the consumer ultimately responsible for the entire cost of the vehicle, this is not a lease. There are instances when this plan is useful, but consumers must enter into these plans fully aware of their contractual obligation and understand the dangers associated with their obligations. The American style, this designation describes leasing plans that offer low down payments. There are still some leasing companies who prefer to have down payments in the range of 20 to 30,000 shekels on mainstream models, which kind of flies in the face of what leasing is all about. But higher down payments are acceptable if it's at your request to further reduce the monthly payment amounts, if you're leasing a high-end vehicle, or if the lease company deems it necessary due to a client's perceived ability to pay. But if these exceptions are not present, it's preferable to use the lower down payment American-style lease program to conserve liquid cash. Again, the closed-end feature, which is what makes a real lease plan, has two ways of being calculated: pre-stated or floating calculation at the end of contract. The first and preferred method is to have the option amount clearly stated on the contract at signing. The second method is to allow this option amount to float until contract's end, typically the future value minus 12 to 15%. This floating method is employed by several lease companies, but it really plays into their hands and not into yours. This plan virtually guarantees that when a person chooses to renew a lease contract, another full down payment will be required. Whereas when you have a contractual pre-stated end-of-term option, there is the opportunity that the amount will be less than the future value of your car. So you'll have some equity that can be applied to your next contract, reducing the next down payment. The most user-friendly results occur when clients opt for this pre-stated option, and the reason is simple. Since the leasing company by contract is giving an end value to which they ultimately are responsible, this future value will be conservative. So when this conservative number is compared to the street value at the end, if we've not had major shifts in the economy, there will be money left over, or equity. This returns us to our westernized perception of what leasing really is. We find it strange that there's a down payment to begin with, but we can accept that fact. Reflecting on Dorothy's words in The Wizard of Oz to Toto, "We're not in Kansas anymore." But it's nice to know there's a leasing plan that we can use in which subsequent down payments can be diminished. Early termination penalties vary widely from charging half of what is owed in the remaining payments to a calculation between the car's current value at termination and its payoff amount. The further you are in the contract, the less likely the early termination fees will be problematic. We now return to the slide Why We Like Leasing in General. This time we will talk about each one of these points individually and explain their benefits and their importance to you. Buying and selling is not always easy in Israel. As already discussed, actually the buying process is a little bit easier than the selling process. Yet not many enjoy the buying process in the first place. There may be language difficulties for you, which can be a big problem. When selling a car here, most people turn to Yad Shtaim. Yad Shtaim is the Israeli version of a Craigslist. Here they can list the car and its attributes and post pictures, but many encounter difficulties when using this medium. One hurdle is depicted here for you in the picture on the right. No, it's not a second-hand mobile phone store, it's what we call the Yad Shtaim desk. I took this picture at a local dealership. Each phone here, and there are 25, represent 2 car listings on the Yad Shtaim site. You see, in an effort to keep retailers from dominating the listings, they must only advertise in the commercial section. And individuals are restricted to listing 2 postings. But dealers don't always like to be relegated to the commercial section, and so have created alternative identities by employing different phone numbers and separate email addresses to enter their cars in the private section of the listing. Sometimes the listings that they post are of cars that do not even exist or of cars with selective information. The purpose, of course, is to get the phone to ring. Then when they get the potential client on the phone, they'll switch him to another car. But by then the damage is done to the legitimate individual sellers who never had an opportunity to speak with that potential buyer. Then there's a logistics problem. Many people who are looking for a car do not have a way to get to you to see the car and so request that you bring it to them. This can be a huge waste of time. Your time can also be wasted simply by fielding the phone calls that come in and making appointments for people to visit who never show up. And as for trade-ins, well, trade-ins are considered a service here. The retail automobile world would prefer not to deal with trade-ins, but they have to at times to make a sale. So they regard a trade-in as a service for which you will pay for this service. Leasing can eliminate all these headaches. The second reason we like leasing is for the protection from depreciation. Here we display two popular car models, the Ford Focus and the Mazda 3. Both are 2011. We chose the 2011 model for comparison purposes because if we compared a newer model, it could be argued that the rate of depreciation is still reflecting some of the residual new car depreciation. So we didn't want to track them till after their first year on the road. So look at the first example, the Ford Focus. You see in January 2012, its value was 102,000 shekels. And in January 2014, it had dropped to 82,000 shekels, which is a 20,000 shekel loss. The Mazda 3 had a value in January of 2012 of 105,000 shekels, and it dropped to 91,000 shekels in January of 2014, therefore losing 14,000 shekels overall. These are quite normal losses in value. Maybe you will reason it's not so drastic. But I draw your attention to the last column, which is May 2014, which is when this video is being made. And you'll see the first quarter of this year that the Ford Focus has dropped to 75,000 shekels. That's a 7,000 shekel loss in just 5 months. That's a third of its total loss over the previous 24 months. And this year is not complete. The Mazda 3 dropped to 85,000 shekels, a loss of 6,000 shekels in the last 5 months, which is very close to half of the total depreciation that it experienced over the previous 24 months. The point is that you cannot rely upon the car market to perform one way or the other. It's not as complex as, say, the stock market, but some of the same principles apply. There's a time to buy, there's a time to sell, and there's a time to hold, and you never know where you're going to be in that cycle. With the lease contract, whatever happens over the contract period, you're protected. You know that at the end of the contract, if the market has performed well, you will have some money left over to apply towards a new lease. If the market has not performed well, as is the current trend, you're protected because you have the abandon option. You return the car and simply walk away. Continuous warranty, that's pretty simple because real American style closed-in lease contracts are for 30 months. And so you will always be covered by factory warranties, which are generally 36 months. New car warranties will give you a lot of peace of mind. Dealing with car repairs can be as frustrating as the buying and selling process. And now we move to the feature everybody likes, which are lower monthly and down payments. The down and monthly payments you see listed here are based on the finance and lease of a 100,000 shekel vehicle. Banks will typically want you to put 10% down on a 60-month finance contract, whereas lease companies are comfortable in the 7,000 and 8,000 range for down payments. The finance payment is figured at prime plus a half and will require you to make a payment of over 1,600 shekels a month. For the same car, a lease only requires 7,900 shekels down and payments in the 990 to 1,250 range. That's a big savings. Why do we display in this example an exact payment on the finance side and a range of payments on the lease side? This is due to the residual value that lease companies will apply to specific models. The higher the residual value, which again is your option amount, the cheaper the monthly payment. A higher residual value can be applied to models that a lease company knows will perform better based on their actuarial tables. So you may see two models that are identical in price. One model will produce a lease payment of $990 and another will have a higher payment of $1250. But even the higher payment of $1250 is over 380 shekels cheaper than the finance payment in the first place, and the commitment is shorter. Gap insurance. True gap insurance is a separate insurance policy that will cover you should you ever experience a total loss, be it a theft or involvement in an accident where the insurance company writes the vehicle off as a total loss. When a claim situation arises on the car, the insurance company will reimburse you and whoever is holding a lien on the car, be it a bank or lease company, for the present value of the car at the time of the incident. They do not take into account any finance charges. So the very beginning of a finance or lease contract, customers are vulnerable to being what we call upside down or in the bucket, meaning they may owe more on the contract than what the insurance company is going to pay in a total loss claim. Now in the West, these gap policies are sold separately and they're extremely affordable, so lease companies apply them on every contract. Unfortunately, we don't have that ability here in Israel, but we do have a little bit of help from the insurance companies themselves on cars that are 2 years old or less. In the first year, should you suffer a total loss, the insurance company will pay the Levi Yitzhak value, which is depicted here. Levi Yitzhak is our local Bible of the car world, and all banks and dealers and lease companies use it. The insurance company will pay the Levi Yitzhak value plus 7.5% in the first year, and in the second year they will pay the Levi Yitzhak value plus 10%. This is a nice feature which is not present when financing a used car. Modern ownership. We don't relate to cars the same way that the generations before us did. We live in a more disposable society. Something breaks, we throw it away and get a new one. I grew up as a grease monkey. My father owned an automobile repair facility, to which my mother was always all too happy to take me to after school. So I learned the mechanical end of cars from an early age. And I remember watching my father as a young boy repair broken components on cars, meaning he would remove such things as starters and alternators and pumps that had failed, and he would rebuild them and put them back on. Over the years, however, it changed, and the change was gradual. When I was in my middle teens, we had already switched to the new way of car repairs, which is component replacement. It was faster and cheaper to put on a new starter than to tear it apart and replace its brushes and reinstall it. That same dynamic is present in the way we treat the ownership of modern-day vehicles as a whole. We use them, then we go and get a new one. And when you add to this new ownership mindset the changes we all encounter in the sizes of our families, possibly due to the children leaving home to join the army, or additions to the family, changes in income, up or down, technology advancements, the need for variety, a change, and the incidence of total losses which forces our hand into another car acquisition, all these triggers result in short average lifespans for car ownership, typically 3 to 4 years. People like to think that they keep their cars longer than that, but the statistics show a different picture. Therefore, leasing more closely matches this modern ownership habit. We hope you've enjoyed the video and that it possibly opened your perception to this finance option. Leasing in general has come a long way since its early days. It makes sense in the developed Western countries today, and we feel even more so here because of the high cost of personal transportation. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us here at the address on your screen, and we'll be glad to address your submissions. Thanks from the folks at ianglo-auto-association.